Hello and welcome to One Good Take. For this episode, I talked to filmmaker Josh Emerick of Myelin, and our focus is on brand story videos. We do a deep dive into why you'd want to make a brand story video in the first place, the benefits to client, objections from client, apprehensions, the process of making this kind of film, and the overall benefit of undertaking this kind of a project. Josh is really great on the whole process from beginning to end. So do stick around. If you're in this space, this is unmissable. Here's their take. Hey Josh, how's it going?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Yeah, good. Where are you?
I'm over here in Columbus, Ohio, in the U.S.
You were experiencing something of a heat wave, although it's winter.
Somewhat of a heat wave. Last week it was freezing cold, and now it's like rainy and warm. So I'll take the warm.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. So one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the show was to talk about brand story videos. I noticed you've done quite a few, and I really love the quality of the work, both visually and creatively in terms of strategy and thinking and story writing. Talk me through how you go about finding a client and working with a client to eke out that story from him or her.
Yeah. Brand story films are kind of what I've always gravitated towards. Like even early on in our career, a lot of the passion projects that we would do, they'd be centered around people. And while I do music videos and brand story films and all this mixture stuff, it all centers around emotional storytelling. And, I'd say I'm less of a filmmaker and I'm more of like someone who's just inherently curious. So I love learning. That's kind of something that's always been there. And anytime we're working with a new client, a lot of times it always starts with that conversation. And I think that is like a common thing in anything as filmmakers. Like our best stories happen when we know what story we need to tell before we ever hit record. So a lot of the times, like I am looking for mostly service-based businesses, but I have done some stuff in product-based, and I'm really looking for human stories, like lifestyle of like, what really is interesting about this person or about this experience or this transformation, and then how can that add value to a brand and its customers, the people who relate to that brand. I guess is like let's attract them with human stories.
Yeah, and so how do you go about finding your clients in the first place? Are they referrals? Are they cold outreach through LinkedIn? How do you do it?
Yeah. I've just now started to play around a little bit more with cold outreach, but truthfully, I'd say I'm really lucky in a lot of the ways. But the way our businesses have all been modeled has been relationship first. I always say our businesses are relationship focused. And because of that, it's like people usually refer us one way or another. So a lot of our work is because we've done work with this person and they have a great experience and they're like, hey, you should really meet Josh and this and that. I have tried doing more cold outreach, but I would really call it more of warm outreach of like, who's like the degree of separation that I really know with this person rather than like, hey, you don't know me at all. I'm Josh. Like I'm trying to do that more and more just because I'm starting to feel this calling of like, we have a little more responsibility. I do believe that we can help more people. And I think beyond just our immediate network, there's a lot of people out there. So a lot of times, I guess if I'm going to give like a cold outreach strategy, it's like I'd rather someone start with their warm, of like, hey, who do you know and who do they maybe know, rather than like, let me go completely cold with someone because it's so much harder to build that relationship. Whereas if you have an in with someone and you really believe that you bring value, which I'll just say this as filmmakers, we bring a ton of value in the stories that we can tell, and believing that goes a long way in being able to make that initial knock.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? I do wonder sometimes, though, because I'm a filmmaker myself, how you get past some of these sort of the typical resistance will be something like a question, was my ROI on this? I mean, it's the thing about the brand story video is it's unlike, say, Google Ads. It's not something you can quite easily measure, and you get a whole load of data and metrics, and you go, yeah, well, this kind of ad needs, we've done an A/B testing and we need to do it again, or let's run B against a new version, etc. With something like a brand story video, for a lot of clients, I don't know if you find this, it's kind of slightly nebulous to sort of, It's a sort of extravagance, well, I'm not sure I need this for my business, and when am I going to see a return on it? How am I going to measure a return? So do you come across these kinds of objections? And if you do, what's your pushback?
I'd love to say that I don't come across those objections, but especially in brand story films, I mean, it's 100% that. And it's the thing that I would flip on them is like, let's come back to that cold email question. It's like, say someone is brand new to me and has never heard of me, and I go knock on their door and I say, hey, you need video. It's like, who are you? Why would I ever want to do that? That's the equivalent of going straight to, say you've never done any video at all. And you're like, you know what? We want to make an ad. You're going right to closing the deal. And if we look at it like a relationship, you usually have to date a few times before someone even feels comfortable saying, like, let's take this thing to the next level. So a brand story film or a client testimonial or anything in these human-based stories, they don't have that punchy in the face CTA. And that's the real magic of it. And when we come to this emotional storytelling, a lot of the people that are saying we want the ROI on this, they're thinking 100% logical. Our brains don't go logical first. We are emotional creatures. We need to open and model relationships with filmmaking. So several pieces of content is usually what we sell. Like even in our model is like, I'm never going saying like, we should do a beautiful brand story film and sink all of the budget in that. With most of our customers, I'm saying, and I would say this when they come to me, is most of the time they're like, we want this 30-second ad to put on Google and to do this. They're going transactional right out the gate. And I really advise against this because video should work very much like how you build relationships with your customers in real life. And usually they don't make that decision unless they're ready to buy right then and there. It's several touch points. So we might do a brand story film. We might do FAQs. We might do client testimonials. We might do process videos. And it's usually better to do a number of those different things and have them all interact together. So it's giving people different entry points into your brand. So a lot of the times I'm like, if you're really thinking about what's my ROI, you're so concerned about the numbers and the cost of this that you're not thinking about the investment of building relationships online with your fan base, with your audience, with your customers, and giving them a peek inside, who are you? You're really selling off of the values, off of what you stand for, off of your process, off of the things that make people feel good. And most of the businesses I'm working with, like I really like to look at like, are you a 5-star, 4-star company that's making great experiences? I mean, to be really generic, if I'm looking at service-based industries, I think there's 3 layers to business. I think there's the beginning where you're selling on the price and you're competing on the price. You don't need video. You're not prepared for it at this point in time because you're just a commodity. There's nothing special about your business quite yet. Just being really frank with you. When you start to get to that 4 and 5-star level of service, it's because you're selling the experience. It's the impact that you're making. And the third level is transformation. When businesses' experience is so good working with them, you're actually making your customers' lives better. This is a great place to kind of hover around and to start tiptoeing into video, marketing, content creation, and telling your story that way. If you're still competing on price, you're probably not quite ready for video, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I mean, how would the conversation typically run? You got your warm lead, either they've been recommended or, they just somehow you had some sort of business with them in the past. What is the process? I mean, you'll have this conversation where you agree to meet and you go into a bit more detail, the discovery call, as we often call it.
Yeah.
What will you start to work with there? Let's say it's somebody local and therefore you can sit down face to face. Will you start to talk about what are your objectives? What are your pain points? Is this the kind of list you go through?
Yeah. Very similar. I kind of have a framework that I walk through. Just over the years, I'm a systems guy, so I'm not as creative as some others might be. And I find that I have to kind of have a framework to make sure I keep them on track, keep me on track, cover all the bases. But I often start with, something along the lines of like, shared stories where I'm like, tell me a little bit about your business, kind of what drives you, what your values are. And I let them know, like, I'm like, I have an agenda, we're going to go over these different areas today. And if there's anything you want to add, like, this is about us building a relationship, see if we're a good fit. Like, I'm not the one-off video guy. I'm the like multiple video. We're building a relationship and I'm only accepting so many clients. So it's like, if this is a first time client, it's like, I want it to really feel like an interview process for both sides. But I start with shared stories, which is like, let's get to know each other. And then that allows me to kind of share a little bit about our business and our vision. And I notice if people aren't opening up right away, that's when I'll lean in and I'll kind of explain, it's like, hey, with past clients I've worked with, we start here because this is where we get to the foundation of understanding how great your business is, what's really driving you. Because if we're just looking at this as video and not storytelling, there is a big difference here. And you are never going to see the value in what we do if we don't start there. From there, it gets a little more strategic where we go into the stakes. So I kind of ask them, I'm just straightforward of like, is this more of a want or a need? Like, how important is getting this project right? What is this project that you have in mind? Are you open-minded to other projects beyond what you're asking for today? Then I'll migrate that into the timeline. When's this thing due? When does it need to be shot? Are there some uncontrollable variables? Is there flexibility to this? Are these imaginary timelines? Are these real deadlines that actually matter? And then I'll move into the budget, which is a little bit further on. And this is always a scary thing for a lot of us filmmakers and creatives that love the work that we do. Like, this was a big hurdle for me was, I just started to really shift it. Like, I started with this framework of like idea versus budget, where I'm like, what's more important, your budget or your idea? Most people land on that. Another way I like to get into that is like, how much money do you have set aside to solve this problem? And it just kind of makes it a little bit safer if they're scared of talking about those numbers. And I can kind of educate them and lay out a spectrum of like, here's what it looks like for this. And then if I haven't kind of got these things, I like to close things down with like, what kind of partnership are you looking for? Are you looking for someone to sail the ship, to navigate all of this? Do you guys kind of want to direct this too, and us be more of execution mode, because that plays a role in how we build out the quote? And then I like to leave it with like expectations and extra things like that, and then give them their homework of like, you can expect a quote in 7 days, and then we're going to kind of chat from there. And I love to get a call scheduled to go over that quote right there on this call, just to remove some of the ghosting that tends to happen in creative services. That's the short of it.
Yeah, no, that's really thorough. What do you do when it comes to any kind of resistance? Will you push against that and sort of really just try and persuade and kind of expand on that? Or will you withdraw because you feel this person's just kind of kicking tires?
It depends. It really comes down to how good of a fit and how open-minded they are. So our core values are curious, honest, and supportive. I feel like I beat this into the ground on so many different things, but I really like to see, do they mimic those values too? Because that's going to really determine how good of a fit we are. I'm less of a convince and persuade type. And I really kind of model my behavior from my old day job when I used to sell windows and doors at Lowe's and Home Depot. Those sort of jobs, I feel like, taught me to be a salesman in a different way, which is I'm going to educate. I'm going to be honest and pretty frank with you about what I think is a good idea versus a bad idea. But I'm going to do it from a place of education, and you get to make your own decision. Like, it's very much choose your own adventure. Make sure we're a good fit. And oftentimes one of the analogies I like to use is we usually do several videos. That's the biggest bang for the buck. Like, for me, if we can kind of batch produce several different films all at one go, it's like we're getting all the ingredients together. It would be insane not to produce multiple things in this time, rather than you hiring me to come back time and time again. So a lot of times I'm like, if they're telling me we want this video to, sell our service, educate someone, share our core values, attract the best employees, I'm like, we're up to 4 objectives right now in one video. That's not a very clear message. It would be better to do 4 videos with one message in them, and you're going to actually have better luck with that because you're going to have these customized tools. Oftentimes, like, more content is going to work in your favor in that way, both in the communication facet, but also if you're going to introduce video, say your first time to this, if you put out one piece of content and you expect that to be the game changer, you're just setting yourself up for failure right there. So a lot of times I'm just trying to encourage, like, if you're going to start this process, you need to be willing to keep sharing and being on brand. Like, you're infusing this into your DNA, online. So we need to keep showing up.
Yeah. And will you create different deliverables for different platforms, and including perhaps vertical versions and that kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of us filmmakers can cringe at vertical video, and I did for a bit, but I've really changed my mindset around that to, we're looking at the platform, we're looking at real estate, and we need to look at that digital real estate for how people are going to ingest that. And for me, I love the work that I get to do, and I love producing really nice, polished, beautiful films. But I also know not everyone's ready for that all the time. And the best way to get them ready for that is giving them early success. Oftentimes, I feel like our brand story films are kind of at the top. Those are the things that are awesome to produce, and they have really good long term ROI, but they don't have immediate ROI. A lot of times, something like simple like FAQs or what I call like our micro films, or which are like thought leadership, these are easy to produce. You can usually do anywhere from like 10 to 50 of these in a day. These are like bite-sized, 45-second to minute and a half long pieces of content. It's a lot of prep. It's a lot of planning. But if we could do 10 of those and they release them every other week, you get 5 months worth of content out of 10 films that we can produce for less than $3,000. So boy, that goes a long way in being able to enhance your marketing and start to build some consistency. And then we can start looking at like video is not video, but it's like we have this pillar of education in alignment with our customers. We have the aspirational, inspirational films that are like the brand story films. And then we have, stories of impact, which are, profitable testimonies that are like, okay, who are the customers we're impacting? And then you can do so many other things like simple explainers and process videos like that too. But it's really hard for someone to invest in the brand story film when they've never done video at all. But if we have an entry point that's like, okay, this isn't the fanciest thing in the world, I'm not going to be putting this in my reel and I'm not excited, but it's going to be really easy to go vertical or to go horizontal or to put this in a pitch deck or to put this on a private page or to put this in email newsletters. There's just a lot of things that I think can be done with video. And I think in our perspective, I see a lot of people in video that want to do the most creative and most exciting things. And gee whiz, I do too, who doesn't? But at the other side of things is like, what's practical, what's going to build our clients up, what's going to be safe. A lot of these things I make for myself too. And it's because I'm using video as much as I'm producing video for other people. And if they're successful with video, they're going to be a lot more likely to hire me again, refer me in the right direction. And I don't know, it just seems like a lot of good things can come from that.
Yeah. And going back to pitching to a client, do you ever go to a client with similar results for a similar business, or not similar results, but you've got some results from, for example, you work with a designer. So let's say you've worked with him and you've got results over time on videos, some sort of metric there. And now you're going to talk to another designer. It might be slightly different, but within the ballpark, similar. Will you then get out those metrics and say, look, we had these results for this person, that person, or will you not sort of use numbers in that way? Is it more about the storytelling?
It is more about the storytelling. And if I was to give advice, I think more often than not, I'm selling a process. That tends to be kind of the thing that people usually make the decision on. Like, numbers are important, but I also understand how dangerous numbers can be from my own perspective. So oftentimes I'm really trying to, like, if I'm talking to a business owner or someone else, I'm trying to say, like, let's talk business owner to business owner. Like, these are things that I'm doing for myself. These are things I'm doing for my clients. Like, here's a past client example. And what I really feel like I sell is confidence. Like, the common thing that I feel like I run into with a lot of our clients is they're really nervous about investing in video because it does cost a lot. Unlike like graphic design definitely costs a lot. Photography definitely costs a lot too. But video costs a lot, and it can go wrong really fast if all engines aren't, all cylinders aren't firing the right way. So a lot of times I'm trying to just reassure them, and I'm trying to remove buyer's remorse through explaining through the process. From the storytelling standpoint, like, I kind of have this framework that's like, if we discover the stories, so what all stories can kind of be told in your brand, helping them kind of asking them questions that like help them echo back, like, oh, this is the impact that we're making. And it almost makes them feel like we have a responsibility to tell this story now, because why wouldn't we tell this story? So a lot of times it's like kind of asking them the questions to help them realize, like, well, it would be insane not to tell this story. Once we gather those stories, it's kind of figuring out what characters need to be the ones who are interviewed or telling this story to get that out there. And it's like, oh, this isn't us just sitting down and talking about this, but it's like, who's your favorite customer? Is a lot of times what I ask them is like, if you had a favorite customer, who is that person? What story do you think they would tell? A testimony is a really smart way for us to start. It's middle ground. It has a good ROI. a lot of times it's like, if you want more of, let's say Johnny's your favorite customer, well, we should be interviewing Johnny and telling his story of his experience of working with your brand, because that's going to attract more Johnny's. So you want more Johnny's, you want more Sarah's, whoever these people are. And I think that's a great way for them to kind of understand and wrap their head around, oh, this is the impact storytelling can have for my brand. Maybe I should stop looking at just what it costs or what this is, but look at, if I had, 20% more Johnny's and Sarah's that are my best customers, then that's absolutely what I want. So it's like, let's use this to model relationship building, storytelling, and not just look at like, well, how much is a video going to cost? And like, what about this? What about that? So a lot of times I do feel the metrics feel more like, I used to lean into metrics a lot more when I was less confident in the power of video. But as someone who started to use video in my own marketing, like most of the time they're talking to me because of a video that they've saw that I've done. And I don't mean my final work. It's like a thought leadership piece that I've done, or a behind the scenes, or a testimony from one of my past clients. And they're like, we want that. And it's like, yeah, so that's how I'm using video for my business. I would love to do that for your business too.
Yeah, I think also one of the dangers of using metrics is that a client will sort of latch on to that and then say, yeah, but you said this kind of project would get this kind of a result. And they're really kind of looking at the wrong things, because as you said, it's a longer term project anyway. So you can't measure it the way you can measure these other things, which is going back to my thing about Google ads and so on. So yeah, I guess keeping numbers out of the conversation is, I mean, you've got to talk about budget, of course. You've got to say, how much of your marketing budget can you allocate to a video? I mean, what do you typically get? Do you get sort of, well, we could put 20% of my marketing budget on this, or do they give you any kind of idea as to how much they can afford that way?
They usually have a good sense of what they think the value of video is. And I feel like I'm working with like, not necessarily like small mom and pop shops. I have a handful of bigger brands that I work with, but for the most part, these are medium-sized businesses, and I feel like they have anywhere from like 3 to 10 people. I'll occasionally work with a solopreneur, but most of the time they want to use video to either attract more employees that have the same values of them, or they want to find more of the right customers. And when I'm asking these questions around what they want to spend, a lot of times I'm like, like, what do you have set aside for this? What do you see as valuable? Like, and that kind of opens them up to like, either they're like, we have no clue whatsoever, or, oftentimes they're like, oh, we got $5,000 or we got $10,000. And most of the time, I'm like, they're coming at me with like one video in mind. And I'm kind of like, well, what if we could deliver several videos and give you, instead of one video to kind of focus one thing on and keep sharing it, what if we gave you 3 months worth of content, 6 months worth of content, a year's worth of content? And that kind of opens them up to looking at it a little more holistically, of like, oh, okay, so say I did a brand story film for $15,000, like that's going to be really hard for them to pocket. But if we could talk about like maybe say $25,000, and I could give you a brand story film, a bunch of FAQs, highlight your team, maybe bring in a couple of interviews, we're really banking on what we've got good at, which is efficiency and planning. And it's like, well, let's use that to your advantage, and let's give you, 50 to 100 pieces of content. Some of that might be super simple stuff like photography or whatnot. But what I'm really trying to give them is confidence, and it's confidence in marketing. And I love killing that marketing word and changing it to storytelling. A lot of times they're not showing up online for their audience and making these connections because they're looking at it as social media or as marketing. And I'm like, how would you show up and share your story if views, likes weren't the thing, but it was more of connection was the thing? So a lot of times it's like, okay, let's, we don't got 15,000 for a brand film. Sure, okay. But we could, stomach up $20,000 and say, do a simpler version of that brand film, maybe highlight some of our best customers and do some FAQs that are like, these are common pain points that we keep having to answer. And what I love about FAQs, and a lot of people don't get this for some reason, is they're like, well, I have the FAQs on my website and it's an answer. But if it's you saying it, it's not just about you answering the question. It's about humanizing the brand and starting to build that relationship with like, oh, hey, it's great to kind of meet you. Now I feel like I trust you a little bit more, and you're removing that resistance from the sales process. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's so much more human, isn't it? I mean, and you've taken the trouble, and, you immediately show that you are accessible. You're not just this print on a page on a website.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, sure. Talking about your process is to, get the story. I'm sure you're taking notes and you're starting to build a script which you show your client, going through the different points. I really like your VOs. They often have some great imagery. I like the skateboarder guy talking about going through a portal and discovering this other side to himself, and that it opened him up not just to the pleasures of skateboarding but other adventures in his life.
Yeah.
Do you, with some of your VOs, write a sort of kind of loose script, if you will, and then your client will, obviously is not an actor, so will just take that and kind of use his own words to sort of get that across?
Yeah, this is a great question. I love talking about this because this is where I feel like emotional storytelling and documentary storytelling, however you want to kind of look at it, really, for me, it's less of a script. Like, I have a general kind of objective that I have of like, this is how we want the people to feel. This is how we want the audience to feel. And a lot of times when I'm interviewing someone, like, I do a decent amount, or my director, depends on if I'm directing or if my director, most of the time, like, we're kind of collaborating together. But I find that most people are super nervous sitting down in front of the camera. I'd say 9 out of 10 people. Occasionally I'll meet someone who's like, yeah, I'm pro at this, like, no big deal. So with that, taking into consideration psychology of how nervous they are to sit down, be in front of the lights, be interviewed, maybe it's the first time they're ever meeting me, I usually say the interview starts before the interview starts, a good 30 minutes before. And it's building the trust, building the conversation, and helping them realize how important their story is. So yeah, I have a takeaway. I might feed them some lines, but for the most part, it's usually more of like steering what they already have in the right direction. And I really see ourselves less as like the camera people and more of the coaches. People stumble, they get nervous because of all the things. And oftentimes I'm just trying to remind them, I'm like, hey, it's really normal to feel nervous in this situation. We've seen it time and time again. And it's like, we're right here. We have 2 cameras rolling. So that is our proofread of this thing. So I'd rather you puke everything out, say what you have to say, and I'm going to hone in on this thing and maybe have you tighten it up a little bit more. In the case of like that skate doc, like, I'm near and dear to skateboarding. Like, that's something that I've been very close to. I kind of know what the story is. I also know the feeling and heart of that. So I'm like, when I'm hearing something, I'm able to really kind of guide something like that right along. Now with businesses, like, part of what I'm trying to do is learn as much about their business, as much about their core values, about their heartbeat, about what it is that's really driving them. And a really good exercise I found is like finding like a word bank. Like, if you had 5 words that really described your business, what would those 5 words be? And would we want to infuse those into interviews? Like, I don't want to force them, but it's like when I'm coaching an interview and it's like, hey, like, this company really prides themselves on, the grit, the persistence that they put into this. Do those words like resonate with you at all? And if they don't, I'm not going to force them to say anything. But if it does, I'm like, could you elaborate a little bit more and maybe try to filter those words into that, because that's a really important word for them. And if you're resonating with that, it would be great to have that as a soundbite in there. So I don't know. I usually go in prepared in terms of, this is the schedule and this is the time we have set aside. This is the general vision we have aside. Here's the takeaway. So I'm not going in, like, even with interviews, I'm like always trying to do 20 minutes or less, because I notice people's like ability to keep forming words, it goes down after 20 minutes. Like 40 minutes is an absolute top. And beyond that, it's like, we're really not getting very much out of that. Like, people are just exhausted. They're questioning themselves. They're kind of like in this like flight response of like, I just want to get out of here as quick as possible. So coming in with kind of a game plan and letting them know how important their story is, that's been really key for this type of work. 2, just being able to like kind of coach them and help them get over some of their insecurities. Like, that happens more often than not. And just being open and listening. Like, I always say, shoot like an editor, like, really listen for the story, make sure you're getting what you want. And don't be afraid to invite your clients into the process too. Like, that's been helpful too, where I like at least let them have, a say in it. And the most powerful question I always feel like happens at the end of every one of these interviews, where I'm like, listen, we've asked you all the things. We asked you what we know. We got these questions here, but, we're ignorant to this. Maybe there's something we haven't asked you that you'd like to add. Is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap this thing up? Because I always say, I don't want you to get up and 10 minutes later be like, oh, I wish I had said that one thing. And I always let them sit in that silence for a little bit. But almost always the best soundbite comes at the tail end of that thing where I'm like, we would have never asked that question.
That's so true. I've noticed that on podcasts. You'll wrap up the podcast and you'll carry on talking for 5 minutes, and you've got all the best bits there, right? After you've turned off the damn record. But it's a really good tip, actually. I mean, I think people don't do that enough. I mean, having worked at many advertising agencies, there wasn't enough of that kind of human moment of just saying, "Hey, let's just settle. Let's just sort of let things stir a little bit, and something might surface." There's always, in my experience, there's always been this kind of, well, we've done the business, that's it, let's get out of here, and it's kind of cold for one thing, but it's also so useful to have that moment of just letting all those words and thoughts settle, and then something quite often, as you say, just bubbles up, doesn't it?
Yeah. It almost feels magical. What I've found over the years is people have such a lack of confidence in going the emotional route. They go logical all the time. It's like, we got to list off all the facts, all the things, all of this. And I'm like, it reads as like arrogant when you go that way. If you talk from the heart, like so often in interviewing, like, I do a lot of work with Nationwide Insurance, and oftentimes they're so factual, and it's like everything that's up on their, like, their vision boards and things like that. And they're talking at that high level of the business. And I'm like, okay, so how does it make you feel?
Yeah.
Like, that is one of the things where it's like, they're like, wait, no one's ever asked me that. I'm like, what does it mean to you? Like, I don't want you to use like at Nationwide, at this. It's like for me, it gives me a sense of pride. For like those little sound bites are all we really need to get in, and then we can go logical. But you got to at least have that first taste of like the emotional side to really get people to care about the logical.
Yeah. I mean, do you remember those days? I don't know if people are still doing them, those horrible sales videos where it's just some guy blasts away and then intercutting with these ridiculously glamorous shots of whatever, in a swimming pool and a beach.
Yep.
And it's just like, no, it's not that. It's making a real connection, like a real person. It's not shouting with a megaphone, you've got to buy this because you're then going to be rich, or whatever it might be. These kind of really loud promises that most of us now are tuning out of, which I think is great. It makes me feel maybe we are, as a society, maturing and realizing that all this kind of shouting and this hard-nosed attitude about making money and doing business is not the whole story. I mean, yes, you've got to make money, but, if you really want to not just develop your business, but actually have a kind of more fulfilling life as a business person, you've got to start this process. Because otherwise you get to the end of your life at 65 and you think, well, I made all this money, but, life's miserable, really.
My man, I mean, Ross, my director, he always says this thing. And I'd say, I love being a filmmaker, but I'm hardly a filmmaker. I'm a storyteller. Like, I can have a conversation with anyone. Ross is about the same way. He always says this thing. He's like, at the end of the day, we all have bills to pay. Like, every one of us. So it's like, are you going to put the bills first, or are you going to put your happiness first? It's like, you're still going to have to pay the bills. That's something to figure out. But like, what's more important to figure out is like, are you living a life of intention, of purpose? Are you fulfilled? And it's like, that might sound fluffy and woo-woo, but I'm like, I found more and more when I take care of myself, when I feel good about myself, like, I also show up better for my clients, for the people I work for my family, for my kiddos, like, just in general. Like, I think we're going to build better businesses, like you said, if we're actually like paying attention to those things.
Yeah. And we're involved in their emotional journey. And that's really important. Most places you work at, you're not involved in anyone's emotional journey but your own.
Yeah.
And it's usually quite miserable because of that,
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, like, over the years, like, I've been really consistent on Instagram in terms of like the platform that I play a lot with. So a lot of these questions, like, it seems silly. And like, sometimes I feel really lucky because it's like, I haven't had to do a whole lot of that cold outreach. So I do struggle with that. Like, now that I like coach other creatives and stuff, it's like it's kind of when that's the biggest pain point is everyone's asking, what's your cold outreach strategy? What's all of this? And it's like I really think the best cold outreach strategy is like showing up online for your audience and as silly as it sounds, posting content of value. Not just posting like I see a lot of filmmakers that post here's like DPs. I follow a ton of DPs and they're always posting like their most fire frames and they add no context. So there's no way for anyone to get to know you or to reach out to you. And it's like when I started out, like I was just a poor boy that didn't have like any of the opportunities that everyone did. And I was like, you know what? I'm just an average person. I'm going to share along on my journey. My story's not going to be as flashy as the next guy. Now, I've done it long enough where I know we do high quality work, but I've stayed consistent in sharing, the thought behind why we do things, the way we do things. And I found that's made a ton of connections. So like in working with businesses, most of the time it's like video is not going to solve their problem. Photography is not going to show their problem. They're actually just like terrible storytellers. They're terrible at sharing their story. And they're wanting the 10 years of results of what I've been doing starting on day one. And I'm like, it's going to take 3 years of you guys staying really consistent with this stuff for it to ever matter, for you to really reap the reward of like, our marketing just works. Well, it's like you're either building momentum or losing momentum is what I say a lot of the times, where it's like, you got to stay consistent with that stuff. I'm not saying you got to post every day. I'm just saying you got to stay committed to your story.
Yeah, and I think you show when you're online that you're interested in a dialogue with people.
Yeah.
So many people in film working in the film world will post their latest success on their short film that got into this festival or whatever, and that's fine. Do that every now and then.
100%.
But if that's all you do, well, you're quickly forgotten. I think.
Yeah. It's hard to connect with that too. Whereas like,
yeah, cool.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of show-off thing, isn't it? You bump into somebody and go, "Oh, I just got this. I've got okay, good for you." Right, fuck off. It's
and you know what's
yeah.
What's weird is I feel like a lot of us creators, like we don't want to come off braggadocious, but it's like, well, I got into this award, so I feel like I should share about it is probably more the mindset. And, it's like, if you're looking at my stuff and thinking that I'm being braggadocious, it's like, I'm just trying to add value. And I hope that you feel safe enough to ask me a question because I'd love to talk about it. Because I used to be that guy that was like, boy, I don't know how to do any of this. And I wish someone would tell me how to do it. I'm trying to be the person that I wish I had when I was starting up. And it's like, I think so much of us could get on board with sharing more of our story if we could get past that, like it's braggadocious and more into the frame of mind of like, what if I could be the filmmaker that I wish I had, or the creative, or the whatever? It's like, that's all. Anytime I'm posting something, I'm like, all right, I don't want to come off salesy. I don't want to come off this, but it's like, is this something that I would have liked to see, a year ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
I thought we'd wrap talking about what else you're doing, because being a filmmaker and a storyteller, I'm sure you are looking at longer form docs, maybe even a feature film, maybe even TV. You've got a team around you. You're clearly very creative. Talk to me a little bit about what you've got going there.
I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible.
Yeah,
because so obviously like JCP was our music video brand that we started early on. Mylan is the thing that we started in 2020, 2019, somewhere around there. And that's our commercial. We had a wedding filmmaking, and all of this has been to kind of support getting back into narrative and documentary. Documentary filmmaking is something I definitely want to do. We got a skate doc that we're going to be working on for the next 2 years. It's fully a passion project. And then, short films are something that I started in back in high school. And part of getting this commercial, music video, all that, and building the business is to eventually fund more of these like short films and whatnot. My partner, Ross Tyson, and I, our newest thing that we're going to be working the next like probably 3 to 5 years to really get off the ground is 228, which is going to be our narrative and documentary filmmaking brand. And yeah, I mean, I want to shoot a feature. I want to shoot, a feature length documentary. I love interviewing people. I love getting to know people. I consume that content like crazy. Like I love shows like True Detective and Fargo. And I don't know. It's just like drama I tend to be drawn to. And part of, getting all these skills is to be able to apply them to my own creative things. Like I'm a huge advocate for spec work and passion projects. I mean, the Spectre film, like that was a passion project that we shot. It's like I wanted to make the kind of work that I want to tell, which, this all leads me closer to documentary filmmaking and narrative. It's like I'm not just doing this for those simple things. And part of that sort of work is trying to build the brand as much as building the filmmaker muscles. Even with 228, like part of our strategy for the last handful of years has been more on the filmmaking front. And we're shifting gears for the next like year at least on doing podcasts around, narrative filmmaking and talking about what this brand's going to stand for, what we want to do for our community, the type of projects that we want to take on, the way we want people to feel. Filmmaking's hard. Being a creative is hard. Funding projects is hard. I just want to say too, like just getting like introduced to your podcast, there's so many that talk about the technical side of things, but I so appreciate the conversations that you're having on this narrative side where I'm like, how did this not exist before now? Like there's a ton in like how to build your commercial business or weddings. There's not a whole lot that kind of cover this beautiful space that you're covering with like interviewing these people around the story, around all the process and stuff with that. So, I'll just say too, is like, I'm so glad that you reached out to me and I'm able to dig into this podcast now as a listener. I was like, I've got to listen to like 4 or 5 episodes now. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Like, and I'm stoked to kind of have a different story on this platform too.
No, it's all good. What kind of genre do you lean toward naturally if we're talking about narrative long form?
Yeah. I want to do drama, thriller. I like horror. I loved horror growing up. And Ross, my director, he's horror, spooky through and through, less on the slasher side, more on the psychological. I'd say we're big on the way the mind works and how we process information. And I feel like that goes into that emotional storytelling too. Like even as like a DP, I feel like my biggest strength is like, again, I'm not coming up with stories or scripts. That's all Ross. But I tend to be really good at like nonverbals or like, what if we slowed the beat down a little bit here? And I think these are some of the skills that we've developed over the years in the commercial and music video space where it's like, that works, but it's like the power of a pause or slowing that down or just like living with that a little bit longer.
It's interesting because the fashion for editing, I'm sure you've noticed this, is frenetic cutting all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's fun, and I get it with a trailer for, say, a podcast, but every so often I think, this is just too much. I can't, all I feel is kind of fidgety and sort of not irritated exactly, but my brain is kind of spinning too much, and I'm not really focusing on what they're talking about. It's just this busyness, and I'm supposed to be attracted to that buzz. Yeah. And I get that, but the risk, I think, is that you create so much buzz that you also then easily create the possibility of an anticlimax, because in life you can't sustain that kind of frenetic madness in anything for too long, and it's not that interesting after a while. It very soon gets boring. So I was interested to hear you when you said just now, you like to introduce pauses strategically, and so that we have some poetry. And I think it's a shame so many in filmmaking have not trusted that more. I don't know if you saw, was it Ghost Story, the story, very haunting story that's always stayed in my head, about a woman who loses, I think it's a boyfriend or husband, and he's basically this ghost in the house, and he's clearly just an actor with a white sheet over his head, right? I don't know if you've seen it, but
I haven't seen it, but I'm super familiar.
I think it's called either The Ghost Story or Ghost Story, something like that. And it's really quite slow. And for an American film, that's unusual, right? Because it's more of considered a European thing. Yeah. But it was so memorable and so much poetry there. I mean, there was one really painful scene where in her grief, the woman just slumps down on the kitchen floor and eats this almost an entire pie. And and it's in real time. She just sits there eating this pie, and it's kind of like, what the fuck, are we really going to see her eat all of this? But it's those moments that really stay with you.
Yeah. because you're relating. So, man, we could talk about editing forever. And I'm just going to go on a little tangent here for 1 second. It's like I started as an editor, and it makes sense to cut, to keep interest, to do those sort of things. But sometimes you got to leave that pain with someone. Like when you're watching that scene, it's painful because it's like, boy, I would have cut by now. But the bravery it takes, and those moments stand out, especially when you have a good, well acted scene where then it forces us, when we feel awkward, to think, what does this scene mean? What does this feel like? Why is this taking longer? And you're breaking up tradition. Like as much as I love social media, it's like everything is super fast paced. And I'm not going to pretend like, that's bad or that's evil. It's just like that is what's working right now. But I think you stand out and you shine even brighter when you take these creative risks this way, to tell stories this way. And so often it's like when you have something that's unfamiliar, it's not just adding to the noise, but it's actually cutting through the noise, and you're saying there's something different here. And now I'm forced to think. Even if it's not great art, a lot of times it's like it's forced me to think. And that's one of the best things that we can do. Like podcasts, I think in general, are a great creative medium because it's not cut down to be for a broadcast or for a commercial. Like someone sits with you and builds a relationship with you. When we let these scenes linger a little bit, it's like a reflection of ourselves where we're like, what do I need to think right now? Like, what is the scene telling me? What is the story telling me? Like, why was that done that way? There's an intention behind it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, sure. So just wrapping up, or we could go on all night. What have you got coming up next? Either brand story or doc?
Right now, a lot of passion projects actually. So it's been a slow start to the year, and I've been grateful for it because last year was kind of madness, like not in a bad way, but like I'm me and Ross are doing a handful of short films. Like we have one coming up this week. We have another one coming up the next week. We have a doc that we're pulling out that I'm like, oh, we've shot this years ago, and I kind of want to pull that back out and like work on that. So I've intentionally been declining some work that just doesn't feel like it aligns with us. And like, I'm in a position where I'm like really grateful in the fact of like, yes, I want work. I want to do more things, but I'm trying to take any amount of free time to pour myself into more passion projects. It's like I've been building all this stuff for so long, and it's like, it's great to have work, but I really want to do more things for myself. Like even the tail end of last year, we did a music video that I think about the profits all the time. And I was like, you know what? I don't even care if we make money off of this. Like I poured myself into it, and creatively, it's one of my favorite projects I've ever done. So I'm just trying to really stoke the creative fire as I've been building this strategic, skill set for the last handful of years. Now I'm like, I want to be creative again. I feel like we leveled up to this point, and now I'm like, I want to take some risks in 2024 and see how that pays off in 2025. Or maybe I'm making the worst decision of my life, but we'll see.
Great. Hey, Josh, thanks so much for talking to me. And anyone watching this, listening to this, should definitely look up your work at Myelin. It's really great standard of work. Really love it. So
Appreciate
thanks
you.
for being with me. Yeah, brilliant.
Have a good one.